CNBC-TV18.
Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The Union government has filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court on the Adani-Hindenburg case. The affidavit is only for the eyes of the judges and has been submitted in a sealed envelope. The court had asked the government to strengthen investor protection after the fall in Adani Group stocks. Ashmit Kumar is here with more. Ashmit, why was the affidavit submitted in a sealed envelope and what next in the matter?
Well, previously, when the Supreme Court took up the matter for hearing, that is the time when the Supreme Court had expressed concerns about lakhs of crores of investor wealth that was wiped out, and subsequently went on to suggest an expert committee that will lead, that will review, as well as suggest improvements to the current framework for investor protection. Now, it is in response to that we understand the government has filed its response before the top court. But interestingly and importantly, this has been done in a sealed cover. So only the top officials at the Finance Ministry, the Solicitor General, and now the judges will be privy to contents of that letter, of that submission that has been put forth before the Apex Court. The question being asked by many is why in a sealed envelope? Well, in just the last hearing, the Solicitor General, appearing on behalf of the government, had expressed concerns that no potentially adverse signals should be sent to the global markets on account of this expert committee reviewing the current framework for investor protection. So that was a concern that was cited by the government. So on the back of that, what can we expect as a part of the sealed cover? Well, number one, the government is expected to, argue, to say that it is in fact open to the idea of an expert committee. However, with riders, what are these riders? That's number two. Number two is that the government is likely to argue and likely to submit as a part of this affidavit that the scope should be limited, should be very limited. The remit of this expert committee should be limited so as to not spook the global markets and the global investors. And the third is, it is likely to have suggested names of experts that can be considered as a part of this expert committee. That will essentially be the three-point formula that will be put forth as a part of this government submission. But whether or not this will be made public, whether or not the government suggestions will be acted upon, and what the future course of action could look like, tomorrow holds the key. February 17th is when the Apex Court takes up this case for further hearing. And what's also interesting is that there's also a fresh application that is seeking a probe, not just into Adani on the corporate governance issues, but also into LIC and SBI on the back of their subscription to the FPO at significantly higher than market level. So these are issues that will be taken up for hearing tomorrow when the Apex Court takes up these petitions in the Adani-Hindenburg case. Back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ashmit, for joining us. Let's shift focus to an important subject in the interest of consumers. Have you ever purchased products after your favorite influencer promoted it on social media? Well, you're not alone. A dipstick survey by the Advertising Standards Council of India has found that 79% of Indians above the age of 18 trust social media influencers and are likely to buy products they endorse. This survey was conducted among 820 respondents. However, the survey also found that complaints over misleading ads are also piling up. To take this forward, I'm now joined by Manisha Kapoor, CEO and Secretary General of Advertising Standards Council of India, the organization behind this survey. Manisha, let me begin by asking you. Your survey says that 90% of respondents have made purchases based on influencer endorsement. Now, what was the main reason for this, or some of the main reasons that you came across during your survey?
Yeah, so thanks, Parikshit. So I think one things we need to remember is that this was an online survey, and therefore, even the respondents are likely to be people who are savvier online, and therefore it's important that this not be generalized to the entire population. So I think for people who are savvy and who are on the lookout for interesting content, who are perhaps used to shopping online as well, and getting both their information as well as doing e-commerce and social commerce, I think influencers become a fairly important way in which they discover new brands, they discover new offerings from brands they may know about, understand how these products may be used, and influencers reviewing such products. So I think there is a fairly intimate relationship between audiences online and influencers, and I think that's the reason why influencers wield so much influence over their audiences and consumption as well.
Right. Also, what were some of the factors that kept audiences away? And the sample size was around 850 respondents?
820. Yeah,
right.
so the sample size
just
was
coming to the fact about Right. About what were the factors because of which people stayed away from endorsements? You spoke about how trust and transparency were very important to consumers.
Absolutely. So I think, again, when we look at an online audience, this is an audience which is becoming savvier about how things and business and content is produced online. It understands that content has a particular agenda. And I don't think they have a problem with that per se, but when that agenda is not disclosed, I think people understand that they are not being given complete information, and that becomes a turn off for them. And that's one of the reasons, in fact, one of the leading reasons why people unfollow certain influencers. The others are things like repetitive content, or content that is no longer relatable in some way. But these are the big reasons, and from an ASCII perspective, it's actually very heartwarming for us to see both sides of the coin, that transparency amongst influencers actually builds trust, and lack of transparency depletes it. So I think this is really a win-win situation for brands, influencers, and audiences, that when there is transparency and authenticity, that everyone finds some value in that content and work.
All right. You've also mentioned the number of complaints you've received since 2020 against influencers, against brand endorsements. What was the nature of these complaints and how were they dealt with by the organization?
So the complaints numbers are both complaints that we have received from members of the public, but also we have a very, very strong suo moto surveillance system using artificial intelligence, and that also tracks a lot of the influencer and brand activities online. And it is through a combination of these two sources that we have taken up these cases. And many of these cases pertain to the non-disclosure guidelines. And as you would know, ASCII released these guidelines in 21. And, now with the government also taking a similar view that any material connection between influencers and brands needs to be disclosed if the post has been paid for in some way by the brand. So that, I think, is the nature of the violations also that we are largely seeing with influencers, which is not disclosing that the content that they are putting out is connected with a brand, and that they may have received either in cash or through certain other arrangements, some kind of a payment to put out that particular content.
Right. Thank you so much, Manisha, for joining us, giving us a sense of your report of why people are choosing brands and what role do influencers have to play here as well. Thanks once again for being with us here on CNBC TV18. We're heading into a short break, but coming up, Republican Nikki Haley announces her presidential bid for 2024 U.S. elections. A discussion with former Indian ambassador to the United States, Navteet Sarna, when we're back.